Hey, Joshua Green here. What is your best advice for having that conversation with the large oil and gas industry that's here in Newfoundland? So you showed the chart with oil and gas being the largest industry here and the largest emitter. What is your best advice for having a positive and useful dialogue with that in mind, that you're at the table with them? What has built up that industry has to change. So what is your best advice to speaking with those people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I guess my advice would follow a couple of lines. So number one, I think really essential that we are realistic about the priorities that private businesses are coming to the table with, right? They're in it to make money for their shareholders. They are profit-seeking institutions. That's why relying on private sector industry and businesses to regulate themselves is never going to get us to where we need to go when it comes to climate action, because profit is always going to be prioritized over social responsibility. That is the reality. And I think we sometimes lose track of that reality when we enter into those kinds of conversations, in part because government has stepped so far back from that regulatory role. And we're looking to private sector players to regulate themselves a lot of the time, and that's really just not how it's going to be. So I think just emphasizing that government regulation has to be a part of the picture, and that we can't expect altruism from for-profit entities most of the time. There are, of course, some very socially responsible for-profit entities that do take that kind of larger perspective into account, but that is often not the case for many other entities. But that doesn't mean that they're not ready to have a conversation. And so there are some interesting examples of the ways in which civil society community members have sat down with private sector actors in the past, and I think helpful to reflect on the ways in which, for instance, Alberta came to the table with its climate action plan in 2015 and hosted the NDP Alberta government at the time. Had a number of different stakeholders and right holders on the stage when they announced their climate action plan. And oil industry representatives were a part of that conversation. So great models there for the ways in which governments, oil industry reps, community members can come together, have that conversation, and figure out a path forward. And a lot of it has to do with just like listening, being open to that conversation, and making sure that government is at the table, willing to hear you out, and creating space for dialogue. However, unfortunately, we saw that after that climate plan was unveiled, a lot of the private sector actors who had stood on the stage kind of retreated into the background and didn't defend some of those policies that they had supported in the outset. So figuring out how the resilience of a network of support to actually hold up those policies as they're being implemented, and to hold private sector actors to account for the promises that they make to support those policies, so to actually make it public that they're supporting those policies, and to hold them account publicly when they fail to offer the support they've promised, has to be a big part of the picture too.